very hard to know where to start. Everything's gone completely bonkers. You have the legal action now poised to take place in response to the British government's determination to break international law. That was the will of the people 10 minutes ago. That deal that Boris Johnson got through Parliament a few days after becoming Prime Minister, I beg your pardon, a few days after winning the last general election, that was the will of the people, this withdrawal agreement. David Frost got a peerage for it. And now it's so absolutely awful, we're going to have to break international law to get out of it and pretend that the European Union are somehow to blame for the self-inflicted mess. Just take a moment sometimes. You have to, I think. Do you agree? Sometimes you have to just double-check that everything is as absolutely crackers as your sort of waters tell you. So, I mean, that's just bonkers. Northern Ireland is economically the best performing part of the United Kingdom, give or take a London, at the moment. And yet, that is apparently a situation so dire that their economic circumstances must be changed. A move so major that it will enrage, well, no, not just enrage, it will entail a breaking of international law. A majority of MPs that would be sitting in Stormont if the DUP hadn't thrown its rattle out of the pram actually oppose what the British government is planning to do. It's just insane. It's absolutely crackers. Is there an analogy for this? Is there a sort of like Emperor's New Clothes type scenario that we can employ where you look at the news? John Redwood today, well, we can't even go there. John Redwood on Twitter, talking gibberish. I mean, genuine gibberish. It's not even worthy of repeating and analysing and pointing out why it's gibberish. It is literally as if he sat on his phone and by an astonishing miracle of buttock-based technology, actual words emerged on a screen and he pressed send. Gibberish to the left of me, gibberish to the right of me. And then you come to the economic situation that the country is facing, regardless. The Daily Mail today has tried to write an article claiming that none of our problems have got anything to do with Brexit. That's just hilarious. It's absolutely bonkers. It's beyond rational analysis. It is literally as if you are standing in the middle of a field, soaking wet, with huge amounts of water, landing on your head, having been precipitated high above you and falling down in droplets, claiming that it's not raining. It is as if you are Rudy Giuliani, with your hair dye dribbling down the side of your face, standing there insisting that you don't wear hair dye. It's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. Everywhere you turn, the bonkersness is increasingly off the scale. And still these people queue up to claim that he's getting all the big calls right. It's hilarious. We have more job vacancies than we have unemployed people, and a large proportion of the unemployed people are not looking for work anyway because they can't. It's incredible. And yet here we are. And then you come to Rwanda, a policy so utterly and blatantly disgusting, so deliberately disgusting, that you wonder why every bishop in the country has bothered putting pen to paper this morning to write to the Times to condemn it. I'm going to read you that letter in a minute. Listen, you probably don't believe in God. Goodness knows. It's a tricky concept at the best of times, and it has historically led into all sorts of choppy waters. But there was some pride, wasn't there, once to be derived from the claim that we were a country that at least followed the Christian tradition. I always think of Bill and Ted at this point in proceedings, and their distillation of the Christian message, of course, right down to its barest bones, namely, be excellent to each other. Be excellent to each other. Turn the other cheek, whatever it may be. New Testament messaging from Jesus Christ, whether you believe in God or not, was philosophically a thing of absolute and unparalleled beauty. I say unparalleled. I was raised in the Christian faith. I'm sure other faiths are paralleled beauties. But for me, there was some pride in the fact that we were a Christian country, or we claimed to be a Christian country. But then you have people like, I popped up on a list. Did I tell you about this? The strangest list, perhaps, I've ever popped up on. In the Catholic Herald or a Catholic newspaper did a list of the country's most prominent Catholic. Yeah, you know how this story ends, right? Did a list of the country's most prominent Catholics. And there I was. So next stop, probably sainthood, isn't it? After that, you should imagine Keith Starr petition. And I looked at some of the other people on the list, and obviously my Christian leanings that made me a little bit reluctant to suggest that some of the other people on the list had no right whatsoever to be there. But if you're presiding over and defending this Rwandan refugee scheme, I don't think you get to call yourself a Christian, frankly. It's the polar opposite of what Jesus taught. It's disgusting. It's as if the parable of the Good Samaritan ended with the Good Samaritan being stuck on a plane and sent to Rwanda. It's incredible. And there we are. Shall I read you the whole letter and then we'll decide what angle we're going to take on this together this morning? I don't do this very often. I'm a big enemy of reading on the radio. If ever anyone is stupid enough to ask me for advice on how to do this job, I always say don't read anything out. Don't even read your introductions at the top of the hour, because people can tell. No one wants to be read to, unless it's a book. But anyway, I'm going to read you a letter, which is from the Most Reverend Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, Dame Sarah Mullally, the Bishop of London, the Right Reverend Paul Butler, the Bishop of Durham, and another 20 Lords Spiritual. So the 21, 2, 3... Is that 4 or 5? Anyway, all the head honchos and honchettes of the Church of England, every single one of them has signed up to this letter. Sir, they write to the Times today, whether or not the first if the Times gets a female editor at some point, will they have to change that to madam? They will, won't they? Will they? Won't they? Will they? All right, not the most pressing question before us this morning. Sir, whether or not the first deportation flight leaves Britain today for Rwanda, we'll just pause there for a moment to reflect upon the likelihood of this government sending the plane if there's only one person on it, or no people. And Priti Patel will be on the telly tomorrow to say that the main thing is that the plane took off. You say there wasn't anyone on it. The main thing is that the plane is currently flying to Rwanda, she will say, with her rather endearing habit of not pronouncing G's. It's flying to Rwanda, she might say, and Sadiq Khan would then oppose the fact that the plane is flying to Rwanda. Why are you drawing attention to the way they speak, James? Answer, because later in the programme we're going to be having a look at the possibility of street slang becoming the most common language, if you like, on the streets of this country within the next 100 years. The amazing thing is about these introductions is that I remember what the general thread is, even as I go off on these ridiculous tangents. So what do you reckon would happen if there were none left, if all the legal challenges were successful and provoked at least postponements of deportations? Would they still... Looking at this government, knowing what you know, do you think they'd still send the flight ahead if there was one refugee on the plane? Yeah, you do, don't you? They would, wouldn't they? What about none? I can't quite imagine them doing that. The main thing is, if it wasn't for those pesky kids, that plane would be full of refugees. Not the ones we like from Ukraine, but the ones we don't like from places like Afghanistan and Syria and Iran. No refugees at all on the plane? Will the plane still take... I can't get an hour out of that, can I? Can I get an hour out of that? Do you think the plane will take off if there aren't any refugees on it? Anyway, I digress. Back to the letter from all the bishops. And I mean all the bishops, not a figure of speech. This is literally all the bishops. All the bishops. Sir, whether or not the first deportation flight leaves Britain today for Rwanda, this policy should shame us as a nation. Rwanda is a brave country recovering from catastrophic genocide. The shame is our own, because our Christian heritage should inspire us to treat asylum seekers with compassion, fairness and justice, as we have for centuries. I'd probably dispute that last bit a little bit. Well, we have sometimes over the centuries. Those to be deported to Rwanda, and this is the important bit, have had no chance to appeal or reunite with family in Britain. They have had no consideration of their asylum claim, recognition of their medical or other needs, or any attempt to understand their predicament. Many are desperate people fleeing unspeakable horrors. Many are Iranians, Eritreans and Sudanese citizens who have an asylum grant rate of at least 88%. These are the people Jesus had in mind, as he said, when we offer hospitality to a stranger, we do it for him. They are the vulnerable that the Old Testament calls us to value. We cannot offer asylum to everyone, but we must not outsource our ethical responsibilities or discard international law which protects the right to claim asylum. We must end the evil trafficking. Many churches are involved in fighting it. This needs global cooperation across every level of society. To reduce dangerous journeys to the UK, we need safe routes. The Church will continue to advocate for them. But deportations and the potential forced return of asylum seekers to their home countries are not the way. This immoral policy shames Britain. That's not, I'm afraid, open to debate. That's just true. But as we discussed yesterday at some length, that's the point. Those of us that despise this policy for moral, ethical reasons, or even religious reasons, if you want to go with the bishops, we agree with the people that applaud it that it's disgusting. We just hate it in the way that other people love it. Some people love this idea. You can see the figure of speech already returning to social media. People like David Lammy, it is suggested, should be deported to Rwanda. It's the sort of 21st century equivalent of send them back where they came from, which I've always felt Lenny Henry dealt with best by saying, great, yeah, I'm from Dudley. I want you to tell me, from whatever perspective you please, let's imagine that, let's say 5 people are on that plane at a cost of about 100 grand per head. Okay, and then of course all the money, the 120 million quid that we've paid, I think, to the Rwandan government to process these applications. What will success look like? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I tried to ask this question yesterday, but I got a bit sidetracked by the realisation, if you like, or the revelation that we actually all agree on this. The people who despise the policy and despise racism, and the people who love the policy because they are racist. We all agree. It's absolutely disgusting what's being done to these people. The difference is some people take pleasure from seeing disgusting things being done to these people, and some people feel great pain and sorrow when they witness it. But we're all looking at the same thing. So that debate's over. What does success look like is part of the question. But here's the thing. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me why they're doing it. It's such a mess. It's probably illegal in large part. And I'll give you one example of somebody whose ticket was cancelled yesterday. Just one example. An Iranian police officer who fled his own country after being, I think, tortured for refusing to open fire on protesters. He fled the regime after refusing an order to shoot protesters. He fears he'll be assassinated if he is deported to Rwanda, and said he would prefer to die now than endure not knowing his fate, in an impassioned plea to the government. That's an Iranian former policeman who fled the regime after refusing to shoot civilian protesters. That's the kind of person that we're deporting. As the bishops pointed out, we're deporting people from countries that have approximately an 88% asylum success rate. These are not the mythical ghouls of Nigel Farage's fetishistic imagination. These are not the fever dreams of the Daily Mail comment section. That's who they are. We seem to have selected them at random, with no particular interest in the validity of their case or the likelihood of their application succeeding. Here is what is happening, in my humble opinion, and then we'll open up the phone lines. Okay? This has been done solely for front pages. It is not designed to break the business model of people traffickers, because it turns the British government into people traffickers. The idea that you somehow prevent people trafficking by becoming people traffickers is absolutely up there with all the other crazy stuff that's going on at the moment. That is, by the way, an opinion. It's not necessarily a fact, and therefore you are welcome to challenge it. But the simple question of why are they doing this when it is unlikely to make the blindest bit of difference to anything, except, of course, make it more likely that if anyone does get here, they're considerably less likely to put their head above the parapet and put in a proper asylum claim. They're much more likely to disappear into the black economy, where they will be exploited and possibly worse. So what does success look like from the government's point of view, or from yours, if you quite like this idea? For, I mean, the most obvious reason being that you hate foreigners or that you believe propaganda. Why are they doing it, and what does success look like? 0345 6060 973. And if you want to have a crack at the question I started with, we can't call ourselves a Christian country, can we, for as long as this policy is in place? We simply can't. You are allowed to disagree with that as well, but I'd be amazed and fascinated to hear how you'd even start to do so. Now, even by my standards, was a fairly lengthy introduction, so let's dive straight into the calls. Why are they doing this, and what does success look like? That the British government becoming people traffickers and temporarily, I hope, kissing goodbye to any claim that this country can describe itself as Christian. Carla is in Bath. Carla, what would you like to say?
Well, I totally agree. I mean, we're not Christians, are we?
Well, you are, all right.
No, I'm not.
Okay, but I mean, the country can't claim to be. Yes.
So, I have feelings and cares for people. But one of the things I did want to mention, yesterday, I don't know who it was, but someone said that the difference between Ukrainian refugees and other refugees, Syrians, Afghanistan, is that they want to go home eventually. Well, how do they not know that the others want to go home eventually too?
Well, if your country is safe and prospering, one imagines the temptation to return would be felt equally across all nationalities. I'm sure if the regime in Iran changed, this policeman who had to flee the country, I think leaving his wife and children behind, would love to return to Iran if he wasn't worried about being thrown into jail or killed. So
yes,
I do.
Exactly.
I'm always slightly wary of picking apart points that haven't been made on this programme, because I didn't witness the point being made, and it sounds like it was made by an idiot. So I wouldn't necessarily give them oxygen on here, and if I did, I'd be able to kneecap them before they'd finish speaking. So
no, I totally.
But that's one of the lines that's being wheeled out, is it? Well, this is just a way of avoiding saying no, the Ukrainians are white.
Yeah,
Carla.
Well, yeah.
I think we both know that.
I think we all know that.
I know, and you're right. These contortions are fascinating. What's the difference between the Ukrainian refugees and the Syrian refugees? Skin colour. I can't say that out loud, obviously, because, I'm not ready to admit that yet publicly. But obviously it's skin colour. What can I say in order to pretend that it isn't? And then Carla's heard someone suggest it's no, the Ukrainians all want to go back to Ukraine. Whereas this fellow who's left his wife and children in Iran would like nothing more than to be living in a bedsit in Blackpool for the rest of his life. 23 minutes after 10. Nothing wrong with Blackpool, by the way. Don't get me mixed up with that Conservative MP from the other day. Ian is in Leicester Square. Oh, speak up a bit, mate. I'll be able to hear you without a phone.
Yeah, open the window. I'll shout over the change.
What would you like to say?
You've just shot my fox, unfortunately. It's all about skin colour. It is. There was somebody. I was listening to something earlier on, and somebody was saying about the Ukrainians. Oh, I offered a room for Ukrainian, and he just didn't go that far. But I wouldn't for these guys, and it's because they're brown or they're black.
Yes,
and it's simple. It's just simple racism.
I know that. You know that. I think that's counting. I don't think that counts as opinion anymore. What does success look like in this context then for somebody like that, or for the government? Because we can't read minds, but we can perhaps analyse policy. If the plane takes off with, let us say, 5 people on it, is that a win?
I think it's a win if it takes off with no passengers on it. I think that they would love it. I don't know where it's taken off from, but they'd love it to go out on telly and on with rendition of "God Save the Queen."
But there's no. Well, they can't do that because Prince Charles has called it appalling. So
or Land of Hope and Glory, whatever they're wanting to put out. I think Liz Truss was at question this morning, wasn't she? And she said that it was a matter of principle, so they were basically checking the route out. And then she was told, well, hold on a minute, this is costing X number of thousands of pounds. Well, it's the principle of it. And that's all they want. They want that to see that to go in the air, so the racist base will say, well, there you go, it's started now, so we're starting to deport people. We've not had anybody on this plane, but that's the first of many.
They wouldn't. I mean, it would be quite good for comic effect if they let it take off without any refugees on it. But I don't think they would. I mean, although you look at some of the stuff people have been persuaded to believe. He got all the big calls right. The point about this plane was never actually having refugees on it, they might say. Who would you send out to do this one? Who's sort of top of the list? That Grant Shapps would have a go at this one. No. What you have to understand is that the point of this policy was never to actually have refugees on that plane. It's merely the symbolic significance of watching the plane take to the skies above the White Cliffs of Dover, and the thought that it could be full of people fleeing Eritrea or Iran or Syria, that was I mean, they could have a go at it. You put nothing past them these days. They're trying to dismantle the will of the people in the House of Commons this week, less than 3 years after insisting that it was oven ready. Peter is in Nantwich. Peter, what does success look like?
Well, first of all, I don't think that this policy is a surprise that it's happening this week. We've got a by-election next week, and they've got to have some sort of point to something and say we are doing something. We're doing something about it. And the problem they've also got is that when they go on about this being a Christian country, which it is, I mean, the head of the Church of England is the Queen.
Yeah.
We've got an array of bishops that are lining up to say that it's wrong,
and the law, of course, as well. So, or judges whose job it is to interpret the law of the land. So you've essentially got, the three of the biggest institutions this country has ever created opposed to it, passionately opposed to it.
Absolutely, and the problem you've got is that everybody in the country will say, last week we had a film that was banned because it was an Islamic film.
Yes, it wasn't banned. It was withdrawn by one cinema chain.
Sorry, it was withdrawn, but we had all these people that wrapped themselves up in the Union flag, jumping up and down and saying this is a Christian country. Are those people standing up today and saying it's a Christian country? They're not. They're saying who these bishops think they are. These are sort of things that because it suits them on one hand to say they're a Christian country because it's bashing anybody that's foreign. Yet today they don't want to be jumping up and down about that because it's going to make them look racist. But
does it work if, let's say, there are 5 people on the plane, and your suggestion is that it is an electoral ploy? It might be, but people would have to come up with a detailed account of why the timing is a coincidence in order to refute your claim. If there are 5 people, is it merely the fact that they've tried to do it and they've talked about it a lot and they've upset all the Liberals? That's the electoral boost, is it? Or is it linked to the number of people on the actual plane?
What they haven't told everybody is that if you look at that MOU between Rwanda and the British government,
yes,
you look at that MOU, Section 2, subsection 16.1, go and have a look at it.
Yes.
We actually got to take...
No, I know that. I don't know that that's quite the gotcha everybody thinks it is. I mean, I know people are pointing it out because the ones cheering the planes leaving are not exactly the kind of people you'd expect to be cheering the planes landing with Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees aboard. And you're right to remind us that it's highly likely that a lot of the cheerleaders are unaware of that fact. But I do worry unintentionally that it lends itself to the sense that that's somehow unwelcome. I think it's wonderful that we're inviting Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees here, but you're right to remind us that the people cheering the thought of an Iranian policeman in fear for his life being deported to Rwanda are less likely to be delighted by the news that we're also going to be taking Rwanda's most vulnerable refugees into this country under the terms of this incredible treaty. Peter, thank you. I guess that's the point, isn't it? Success is not going to be numerical. I think probably failure might be. If it's got 0 people on the plane, it's not going to be a success in any measurable sense. But as an intangible, the fact that they can, the Mail will do what the Mail always does, and turn on absolutely everybody, whether it's the bishops or the royal family or junior doctors or train drivers they just hate everybody. It's a wonderful business model. It's quite fair, actually, I suppose. It's quite equal opportunities. Everybody is fair game, even Conservative prime ministers, of course, if they're not bonkers enough. But is the conversation the victory? That's what worries me. It's why I haven't spoken about it really until this week, when I felt we had no choice. 0345 6060973. And come at it from the Christian angle if you want. Tell me why you think this doesn't rob us of the right to call ourselves a Christian country for as long as this government remains in place or this policy remains in the pipeline. Mike's been in touch. Mike's texted to say, if they have one person on plane, it will be gate. I think it obviously means great. He's just put G and then 8 next to it. I mean, Mike exists, I think. There are Mikes out there. One person would be great. So that means Mike thinks that £500,000 or £600,000 to deport one refugee to Rwanda under a legal framework that means that they might have to bring him back in a month after the big court hearing occurs. That's in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Mike thinks that's a good thing. That's money well spent. And listen, I mean, it's easy to rip the Mickey out of Mike. I mean, really, really easy. But he exists. His vote's worth the same as yours. And that analysis that this doesn't have anything to do with how many people are on the plane is valid. So what does success look like? 03456060973. And given that it's such an almighty mess, why are they doing it? Liz is in Cricklade. Liz, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Liz.
Success on a plate for the Tories is that all of the blame for the immigrants still being here and making people believe that all of their problems are emanating from immigrants, particularly brown and black immigrants, is the fault of the left liberal.
Is that landing, do you think? I mean, I know the Mail have got it on their front page every day, but this is the same newspaper that had High Court judges as enemies of the people not long ago, and a big picture of Theresa May when they thought she was the answer to all their fever dreams under the headline Crush the Saboteurs. So, you know, that sort of house journal of absolute madness notwithstanding. Is it landing? I mean, does it work politically if nobody gets deported and they paint targets on the back of lawyers, which, of course... The security services have asked politicians to stop doing that after at least one act of terror was committed in a lawyer's office, but they haven't paid much attention to that.
It is landing with certain people,
okay.
But it also means that it's
Mike.
actually... yes, but like Mike, and I mean, I spent yesterday speaking to one lady who had a pair of secateurs in her hand, and I thought she was going to attack me with them because she's so cross, and it's all our fault.
Right.
And you know, and it's to do with we tried to steal Brexit from them, and now we're stealing this, you know, this solution, which they see as part of the solution.
And if you told her about,
you can't get through to them.
No, but if you told her about this policeman and what he was fleeing, would she still be convinced, or would that be cherry picking? And then there's all the ones that I haven't got any details about, but they must be really awful.
The acceptance of the dehumanisation, because of the anger, means that they don't have any empathy, and it's all about, well, I've got such a bad time, it's so difficult for us, and we have to come first, and we should stop paying all that foreign aid, and the same cocktail is in there. But I do believe that the other sort of softer voter that was taken in with Brexit and general election 19 to vote for Boris are repulsed by it. And they're, you know, you can see that they're like, oh my goodness, this is really uncomfortable.
That's why I asked if it was landing.
It means their base is dwindling.
Yeah, that's what intrigues me by it, because I certainly wouldn't say that everybody who voted for Brexit will be in favour of deporting refugees in fear of their life. I categorically don't believe that for a minute. But then again, if you put the emphasis in the other direction and you find people who are in favour of this disgusting policy, I think the likelihood that they also voted for Brexit in order to get rid of foreigners is probably pretty high. So it's one of those lenses, isn't it, that casts a different light in different directions. Thank you, Liz. Sean's in Dublin, so will I be on Friday night. Sean, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James? Yeah, I'm just back to success. Success is going to be one refugee on that plane.
Is it?
The way they're going to stay.
You reckon? I'm not so sure.
They will look at it, because once there is one on it, look what we've done. We've tried. They will then start blaming the left-wing lawyers. We tried and think. Now, it's nothing to do with the lawyers. You need to drop the ERS. It's to do with the law. And then you have the implementation of the law, which the judges will be working off.
Yes.
And now we're back to that horrible headline, I think it was on the Mail a while back, where it had the judges are the people that are the enemies of the state. And it comes back to that. But we tried our best. Look, we tried. We had 151, down to 50. And this is the thing. They will spin the success in one. It's a bit like the way they've worked on Brexit now. Brexit is now, it's a Remainers Brexit. They'll turn everything to suit themselves.
That was only David Davis. So I don't think, again, it's so hard to be generous, isn't it? But it's important to try. They're not all as mad as David Davis, are they, and John Redwood? Lots of people who voted for it, whether they've seen the light yet or not.
Was incredible this morning, what the nonsense he tweeted. I like the the bum analogy that you had
with the phone. I mean, you can't. So I mean, yeah. I guess if someone doesn't want to be lumped into the same categories as David Davis and John Redwood and Nadine Dorries and the rest of them, then it's up to them to speak up and explain what makes them different. So yeah, all right, I'll give you that. So one person on the flight works as a win because we have. See, the thing about the law is that it applies to everybody. I mean, it's like levels of membership, isn't it, in a club? So if you're a British citizen, some laws will apply to you that don't apply to other people. You know, for example, the right to live here or just stay here without having to go through any application process or jump through any hoops. But some laws apply to you just because you're human. It's like a lower level of membership that applies to all humans. And there's no logical reason why any human would want fewer human rights. But then again, we're living in a country that has imposed economic sanctions on itself. James is in Brentwood. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I definitely agree with you on the root aim of the policy is just pandering to the...
It's noise, isn't it? It's about making noise more than about making people
one
move.
Thing, I did want to pull you up on one thing, though.
Sure.
When you were talking about that tweet from Mike, you said his vote counts the same as the rest of us.
Yeah.
And that's not true. My vote basically doesn't count where I live because it's a
slightly pedantic point, and I will counter it because I can a pedant with the best of them by claiming that I was referring to the referendum at that point in the programme, James.
Right.
So stick that in your pipe of pedantry and puff on it.
But I did want to call you out as well because I'm a big fan of your show.
Yes.
Most of the things you say, but I never hear you talk about
the first past the post stuff. It's on my list, actually. I think it's increasingly hard. I was thinking this at the weekend for not to support it when you look at how a small number. Well, also when you look at what some MPs with massive majorities can get away with now, and the idea that they never, ever, ever have. If you like, any sort of form of democratic accountability, I would agree with you on that. But it's not the day for that today, I don't think. Unless, I suppose, we would...
I know, a lot of these issues come about because of the current undemocratic system, though. That's how they get away with it. It's how the Tories kind of cheat their way into power.
So, that aside, then, what does success look like for you? I mean, one person on the plane, 5 people?
Yeah, one person will be enough that can... Even if it all fails, they'll try to spin it as, oh, look what the wokeists have done. They've stopped us, supporting these foreigners, these terrorists, and all the things they usually do. They're spinning the whole war on woke thing to get people
by deporting a police. Getting the juices flowing, as it were, by deporting a police officer or trying to deport a police officer who fled Iran after refusing to shoot protesters, because we don't want people like that in this country. In fact, that's not even funny, is it? Priti Patel probably doesn't want people like that in this country. What do you mean you refuse to shoot protesters? That's ridiculous. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. So what does success look like? Why are they doing it? Jim's in Watford. Jim, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Well, one potential way of looking at this is, yes, we've got immigration into this country. We've got to offer these people a very safe and secure way of seeking asylum and going through the natural process then of whether they're legitimate or not. But perhaps one element to look at here is purely the cost of it. And by all accounts, it's costing £5 million a day. So £5 million a day, 365 days in the year, that's just under $2 billion. So when you take the...
Sorry, what's costing that?
So, by all accounts, the government is...
Well, what do you say, by all accounts? I don't mean which accounts.
Well, the government actually says that immigration costs £5 million a day.
No, it doesn't. I mean, immigration is a net positive for the British economy. You must be talking about a specific...
No, looking after asylum seekers.
Well, that's nothing to do with immigration, is it? Immigration is everybody who wasn't born here but currently works here and the financial contribution that they make to the country. So if you want to, by all accounts we'd have to do a calculation there, wouldn't we? And also, I'm very much in favour of letting asylum seekers work, as they are permitted to do in other countries, in which case the cost becomes zero overnight. So we've solved that problem.
I have no problem with that. If once they've actually proved who they are and what they are, because our borders aren't
They can work. They can work while the application is being processed.
Well, I work in the military.
In other countries.
Well, I work in the military, and part of my role is to keep this country safe.
Yes.
So by doing that, when you're actually seeing people actually rolling up on your doorsteps without any paperwork, and there is a huge amount of
they're not going to go through the application process, are they? Under your scheme, they're just going to disappear into the black economy, and that of course won't cost the country anything.
Not at all. But anybody that's arriving in this country without paperwork, that's seeking asylum, for instance, we need to put them through a process. Now, one way of looking at this, what success could be like, is to reduce the cost of that.
Well, you keep going on about this, but the cost of sending them to Rwanda, as opposed to letting them work while they're being processed here, is going to be immeasurably higher.
Well,
I mean, you sound, I'm sure you don't mean to, but you sound like someone who's desperately trying to come up with a theory that doesn't sound callous and racist to justify something that actually appeals to you on a more base level. But I'm sure you're not. No, absolutely. I'm categorically sure you're not. I'm just warning you that that's what you sound like.
It's just one way of looking at it.
But it isn't, though, is it? We've just established that this is a pointless argument, which is why it sounds a little bit like a fig leaf designed to disguise something uglier, because you can reduce the costs of asylum applications overnight by letting asylum applicants work and earn a crust and even pay perhaps some taxes. And the cost of sending them to Rwanda, if there are 5 people on the plane tonight, is going to be £100,000 per capita. So how does that save us money?
But that's assuming those people that are arriving in this country without any paperwork.
Well, you keep saying that they're arriving without any paperwork. So what do we do? This Iranian fellow, this Iranian policeman, presumably arrived with his Iranian passport, and they're trying to deport him. So again, it's one of those figures of speech that I keep hearing from people who seem to be desperately trying to sound, well, that's not beat about the bush, Jim. It's like a phrase that's used by people who are desperate to pretend they're not just racist. So what do we do with this Iranian police officer? He's got his passport with him. Why are you talking about people who haven't got any papers when he was supposed to be on the plane today?
Well, once you've established who and what they are, but you firstly need to establish who and what they are.
Well, that's what we do. That's the asylum application process.
Yes.
And he's still getting deported.
You're not being deported.
Mate, his ticket was cancelled yesterday. If it wasn't for those lefty lawyers, he'd be in Rwanda tonight.
They're not deporting them. What they were actually doing is moving them off country into a safe place while they actually go through their process of seeking asylum in this country.
Yes, and if it succeeds, no, Jim, you've misunderstood that as well. If the application succeeds, they stay in Rwanda, Jim.
No, they have. Well, that's not what my understanding. And my understanding is
mate, with respect, I don't care what your understanding is. I deal in the facts. If the application is successful, they stay in Rwanda. So your whole support for this scheme is based upon ignorance.
I wouldn't say that at all, James.
Well, what would you say? How would you describe thinking something is true that categorically isn't? What word do you prefer? Because I'm keen to be generous.
Well, I think you're telling me now something that is different to what I've been instructed about, which is the fact.
Well, who instructed you, Jim?
Well, process is part of my job, so.
Yeah, who instructed you that the people who successfully apply for asylum in Rwanda get flown straight back to Britain?
No, they have a right. Then, if they're given...
No, they don't, Jim. But who instructed you this? Because if this is something that people in the British military are being instructed about, and it's categorically wrong, I'm 100% confident of that. We've got quite a big story on our hands, and I'll have to alert the news desk. So who told you that the successful applicants can come back to Britain?
James, I can't go into that. But
oh, you have to, Jim. Seriously. It's all right. I've signed the Official Secrets Act.
So have I. So
yeah. So who told you that, Jim?
James?
Who told you that nonsense? Or have you just humiliated yourself on national radio?
No, not at all. And
so who told you then?
Perhaps James.
Who told you, Jim?
To some of your colleagues.
Possibly I do, Jim. But I'm listening to you. I'm listening to you at the moment. So who gave you this false information upon which you've based your entire support for a racist policy?
It's not, James, it's not a racist policy.
Mate, you didn't know what the policy was until I told you 3 minutes ago. How can you even have an opinion on it?
Well, I've been told the policy is
by who?
Very different.
Who told you that?
My superiors.
Now you're lying.
I'm not lying, James.
Okay, so who told you that successful applications in Rwanda, just give me the sort of job description of what they do, or the rank.
James, this is just coming down through paperwork in how
Can I see the paperwork?
No, you can't see the paperwork.
Because it doesn't exist, Jim. Nor can you. It's imaginary paperwork.
James, listen.
I have listened. That's the problem, Jim. If I hadn't, you might have got away with some of this. But here you are, on a line.
Not at all.
The lips
James,
are moving.
This is part of the conversation, James. You're saying one thing.
No. I'm telling you the facts, and you're now spluttering inanely.
I'm not spluttering inanely.
Oh, no, you are. Again, that's another fact.
Not at all.
So, final chance. Who gave you the duff information about this?
James, it's duff in your opinion, and your opinion only.
It's not an opinion, Jim. It's written down in law.
James, it's not written in law.
Okay, Jim. You going to tell me who told you?
No.
Have a great day, mate.
And you. Bye-bye.
It's 10:49. And no, I cannot categorically state that the last caller wasn't Mark Francois in disguise, as a lot of you are suggesting, but I'm fairly confident that it wasn't. I turn attention next to one of the other big crises, self-inflicted crises that the country is currently facing. Of course, the proposal to essentially break international law and tear up the treaty that Boris Johnson signed, the oven-ready one that was the will of the people and got him elected, that he is now seeking to abandon, despite the fact, of course, that the 2019 manifesto contained a pledge never to renegotiate or reopen negotiations on Brexit. And I thought we'd get a view from Dublin on this one, or at least from the Republic of Ireland, because it's a contribution to the conversation that possibly gets a little bit overlooked. I'm very glad, therefore, to welcome Neil Richmond onto the programme, the TD, the Fine Gael TD for Dublin Rathdown, and a spokesperson for that party, the spokesperson on European affairs. Neil, first of all, congratulations for making your own little advert before you came on the programme. I've just seen it on your Twitter page. I think we both look great there. I like that. Should be compulsory for contributors to the programme. Before we get into the detail of it, how do we look? How does Westminster look from Dublin at the moment?
Really, really badly. Unfortunately, and I say this with no joy because I love the United Kingdom. Most of my family live there. It's a great country, but your government is absolutely ruining the reputation of that once great country. And this is easily the lowest point in Anglo-Irish relations and indeed EU-UK relations, I'd say, not just since the Brexit referendum, but probably since the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998.
And I mean, you speak to family members here. You would probably still be slightly surprised by the distorting lens of the British media. Even impartial media, if you like, or balanced media has to adopt a sort of two-sides approach, as if, you know, that the United Kingdom is doing this, the European Union is doing that. Address the suggestion that the European Union is being stubborn or is being in some way complicit in the crisis.
Yeah, no, I've heard it quite a bit over the last couple of days that the EU is being intransigent, that the EU needs to change their mandate, that the EU wants to punish the UK and stop the benefits of Brexit. The EU is doing no such thing. You know, we never asked for Brexit, particularly those of us within Ireland never asked for it. And throughout this sorry process, the EU is consistently engaged, consistently negotiated, and consistently worked to produce solutions to the problems that Brexit presents. A lot of us spent quite a bit of time leading up to the referendum pointing out that our biggest fear about Brexit, you know, the people of the UK were more than free to make their own decision, but our biggest fear is it has massive impacts on the Good Friday Agreement, on the stability and peace of the island that I call home. We weren't listened to, we were ignored and we were dismissed, particularly by those who pushed this the hardest. And sadly, our Project Fear has become Project Reality. And yet we're being told it's all the EU's fault and the EU needs to change everything, where the British government haven't engaged in negotiation. Liz Truss has pulled stumps in negotiations on the 24th of February and has come back and thrown an absolute wrecking ball at the situation and is doing it in a way. You heard the Prime Minister yesterday so casually saying this is no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It's my livelihood on the line. It's the livelihood of the people he represents on the line. And the last thing the people of Great Britain need is a trade war with its closest and most important partner when there's an actual war in Europe and we're all facing a cost of living crisis, albeit the data shows it's a little bit worse, sadly, for Great Britain due to Brexit.
Yeah, compared to Northern Ireland it is. But the idiot's guide, if you would, Neil, on the threat to the Good Friday Agreement, just talk us through the sort of salient points on that.
The whole thing is that Brexit requires checks. The British government has decided to leave the EU, grand. We accept that. There's one land frontier between the UK and the EU, and that is the border within the island of Ireland. 499 kilometres, 208 recognised crossings. The British government has decided to go for a hard Brexit. They're not staying within the single market. They're not staying within customs union. And therefore, that requires checks coming into the single market. My market. I want to make sure that my food is safe to eat, that the products coming in aren't going to burst up in flames. They meet proper standards. So where do we have the checks? You have to have them somewhere. The agreement is checks at 3 or 4 ports of entry on less than 3% of goods coming in from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, or the alternative, the potential requirement for checks across the entire border in Ireland. Anyone with a scant knowledge of history of these islands knows that that is a very delicate situation. It's a very difficult border. There's lots of things that are unstable in Northern Ireland at the moment, but the possibility of having to have customs inspectors at 208 recognised crossings, that's not talking about the boreens and back roads, 208 recognised crossings that were blown up in the past during really sad times that no one wants to go back to, no one thinks we will. That's what the risk is.
No, you say no one wants to go back to that. A couple of my callers yesterday suggested that perhaps the DUP do. Would you give that thought the time of day?
I don't know what the DUP want. I don't think the DUP know what they want. The DUP pushed Brexit the hardest in Northern Ireland. Yes. They held the balance of power in Westminster for 2 years and said no to everything. Even this legislation announced yesterday, one of the lines put out is this will get the executive back up and running. The DUP haven't said they've gone back into power and back this. They've given it a cautious welcome and let's see what happens. But yet we have a majority in the Northern Irish Assembly, a majority of members, a majority of parties writing to the Prime Minister saying, please don't go ahead with this legislation.
That's an important point that, again, has not been overly reported in this country. A majority of Assembly members saying don't do this. That's a majority of Northern Ireland's elected politicians saying don't do this thing that is being imposed upon them from London. It's, that's pretty huge, isn't it? In normal times, let alone, as you point out, in a time of crisis, international crisis.
Like, if we believe in democracy, if we believe in the rule of law, 52 out of the 90 MLAs elected only a couple of weeks ago, these haven't been in power a very long
52,
time.
It's always 52, isn't it? Flipping it.
Yeah, 52 out of 90 elected, making it quite clear they don't want this to go ahead. We have all the business groups in Northern Ireland saying we don't want this to go ahead. It causes instability. And the very people that this is trying to appease aren't even sold by it either. I do not see who benefits from these proposals. Is it Liz Truss because she wants to be the next Prime Minister? Is it Boris Johnson because we're not talking about Partygate or whatever else? I had a responsibility earlier before I came on to go on radio with Andrew Bridge in Ireland. And this is a man that called for the Prime Minister to resign a couple of months ago, that probably voted no confidence on him, out batting and defending his Prime Minister, because if in doubt, pick a row with the EU and the hardliners and the backbenchers will always rally the flag.
Yes, but of course he'll be getting his Irish passport soon, won't he, by dint of being a British citizen, Andrew Bridge. And I think that was a lesson he learnt last time he was on the radio over there, that perhaps it wouldn't be quite as straightforward as he thought. Neil, we should talk more. Thank you for that. And I wish we weren't in a situation where we should talk more, but as I suspect both of us appreciate, this situation is not going to get better any time soon. Wayne pointed out that we could hear Theo Usherwood come into the studio today. He says, my Beats headphones don't miss anything because of the squeaking studio door. Keith, can we get some WD-40 or something like that? If Wayne's hearing it in Basildon, then goodness knows. It's not your fault, mate. You didn't. It's the door, isn't it? A squeaky door. Speaking of meaningful jobs, Lord Guyte has been talking to a select committee this morning.
So Lord Christopher Guyte is the independent advisor on ministerial standards. There's just a bit you need to know before we get into exactly what he's got to say. When Partygate happened, he did not have the power to initiate his own investigation. That had to come from, the initiation of any investigation had to come from the Prime Minister. Since Partygate happened, he has been given the power to initiate his own investigation, except in matters of national security. So he can launch his own investigation. Now, William Ragg is chairman of the Public Administration Committee, and he asked Lord Guyte whether he thought it was slightly odd that he's got this new power to initiate his own investigation, but only after Partygate.
I mean, it's a little bit odd, isn't it, that you have a revision of the code, enhanced powers given to you, that if they were in place when, topical matters came to light, such as a fixed penalty notice, would result in you being able to initiate an investigation. I mean, is it odd? Is it a matter of timing? You know, what do you put it down to?
Sorry, why I have suddenly come into this new power, as it were,
yeah, why after the event and the ability of you to do anything under the previous iteration of the code, it's a bit odd.
Well, I'm glad that I've now got the new power, and to your and Mr. Cowan's question, I'm not going to be restrained from using it where necessary.
This was a Westminster masterclass, James, in saying something and nothing all at the same time. You could hear the way that Lord Geidt tried to evade that question. He was then asked by the Labour MP, John McDonnell, whether he'd even asked the Prime Minister at the height of the Partygate if he could launch his own inquiry into whether the Prime Minister broke the ministerial code.
Even under the old powers, you still had the opportunity to raise the matter with the Prime Minister,
yes,
to request initiation of inquiry.
Absolutely.
Did you?
And that is precisely what my standing advice had been since both first the Cabinet Secretaries and then Sue Gray's report was initiated, and then subsequently when the Metropolitan Police. So the standing position there was to make sure that there was a publicly articulated position by the Prime Minister. He should use the opportunities that were available to him to put that into the public square.
That's somewhat asking the Prime Minister to make a form of a statement is different from you asking the Prime Minister to undertake a formal investigation. Did you ask him to enable you to perform your role to initiate an investigation?
No, I didn't.
Go on.
Go on, no, he's just saying he didn't even ask to launch an investigation.
He's not... listen, you're more in your comfort zone with this stuff than I am, but he's not sounding terribly independent to me.
No, he's not.
I'm an asset, if you like, of the Prime Minister as a Minister of the Crown, rather than a free orbiting advisor with a different source of authority.
It's not independent, effectively. You know, the appointments process, for instance, is the Prime Minister who decides in terms of appointments. I just find it slightly disingenuous in terms of the emphasis that we put on independence, because at the moment that certainly isn't the case, in my opinion. Would you agree?
I think we can agree to the extent that the new terms of reference show that there is some small limitation on the capacity of the independent advisor to be truly independent.
So he's not independent. So this is the sum of what Lord Geidt has been saying. We had Partygate. Lord Geidt didn't have the power to ask for an inquiry. He didn't ask for an inquiry. But he did ask the Prime Minister to issue a statement, which the Prime Minister did. Therefore, in Lord Geidt's view, an inquiry wasn't needed. But he can now ask for an inquiry if he wants to ask for an inquiry.
Just do that again, will you?
Right. So Partygate happened.
Yeah.
Lord Geidt, at the time, didn't have the power to ask for an inquiry into whether the Prime Minister broke the ministerial code. So he didn't ask for an inquiry into whether the Prime Minister broke the ministerial code.
Right.
But he did ask, as you heard him answering John McDonnell's question, for the Prime Minister to issue his own statement, which the Prime Minister did. And surprise, surprise, the Prime Minister didn't think that he broke the ministerial code.
Mm.
Therefore, in Lord Geidt's view, an inquiry wasn't needed into whether the Prime Minister broke the ministerial code.
Because the Prime Minister had decided that he hadn't broken the ministerial
in his statement, which Lord Geidt asked to issue in a statement, but he didn't ask.
This is as mad as I feared. I thought I'd lost concentration halfway through this thing, and I was a bit embarrassed to admit it. But it is actually as bonkers as I was beginning to fear here.
It is quite bonkers, yes.
So have you read
Catch-22? Your word, by the way.
Have you read Catch-22 by Joseph Heller?
Brief.
There are some flights of fancy in there that are... I mean, Catch-22 fundamentally is that you can't go home from the war by pleading insanity, because if you want to go home from the war, you can't possibly be insane.
Right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
That's Catch-22. But some of the exchanges between Major and Yossarian are surreal, and we're in that kind of territory here. So he didn't call an inquiry into whether the Prime Minister had broken the ministerial code, because the Prime Minister had made a statement in which he insisted that he hadn't broken the
He did ask him to make that statement as to whether he'd broken the ministerial code.
And at that point, the necessity of an inquiry into whether or not he's broken the ministerial code somehow disappeared.
Yes, but he didn't have the power to ask whether he could launch an inquiry into the ministerial code being broken.
But he didn't even try. He could have asked.
No, because he didn't have the power.
He could have asked.
Yes, he could have asked.
But he didn't ask.
No, he didn't ask.
Is there any more?
Well, he was asked just now by John McDonnell again whether he'd ever considered resigning.
There are a few instruments available to an independent advisor, and important to consider what is going to work best in the interest not of me, but of preserving the integrity of the system and of the code, and in making it work, in advising the Prime Minister on holding ministers, including a Prime Minister, publicly to account. So, again, I haven't given you a direct answer, but I don't think there was ever a single direct proposition in my own mind.
I'm going to take that answer as at least it was on the agenda.
We've mentioned before in evidence that it's always on the agenda as an available remedy to a particular problem, and one that my predecessor indeed exercised in November.
I'm very late for the news because I fell down some sort of vortex. If we come back after the news and start again, would I understand it any better? But we may find, I don't know if I can bear it.